It's 2025 and a new year means brand new opportunities. And for a lot of you out there, I know you've been thinking about one thing over the holidays, and that is starting your own business. But you have so many questions like how do I get started? How do I come up with a brand? How do I even sell stuff to people? And what am I even going to sell? Now take a deep breath. Shopify has got you. Shopify makes it simple to create your brand, open for business, and get your first sale. And you can get your store up and running easily with thousands of customizable templates. You don't have to be a coding nerd or a design geek to get this done. All you need to do is drag and drop. Shopify also helps with the details like shipping, taxes, and payments from one single dashboard, so you can focus on the important stuff, like growing your business. Established in 2025 has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/truecrime, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/truecrime to start selling with Shopify today. Shopify.com/truecrime.
I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. Welcome back to the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs. I'm your host, Alice, and I'm joined, as always, by my Sell Bright, Sell Light co-host, Brett.
Wow, Alice, you're really reaching back there. You know, Alice, this is one of my favorite episodes. Whenever we get to do this and basically sit and listen to someone much smarter than me, that's when I like doing this podcast. I'm very excited about today's episode.
I am too, Brett, and I like how you were very good and nuanced in saying someone's smarter than you, so as not to implicate me. But I'm going to throw myself in there. Today, we have a guest you guys are all going to just eat up. So many of you have written to us about questions you have about federal investigations, about FBI, about how the magic of cell phones work and how that can help solve crimes. Well, here today, we have a very special guest, Special Agent Jay Berni with the FBI's Cellular Analysis Survey Team. You may have heard it as CAST. Jay, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
I mean, there's so much. And is it okay if I call you Jay? Everyone should know that typically people have to call you Special Agent Berni.
Oh, please. No, please. Jay is awesome. Thanks.
We know
Absolutely.
Jay well, so you know I've had the pleasure of attending several of his trainings where he trains up law enforcement on how cell phones work. So this is a special treat for us.
Exactly. So you're hearing from the expert. I mean, he is the one who goes around and makes sure that law enforcement know how cell phones work. It's actually a very specialized unit. And we're going to hear all about the magic of cell phones, how he uses what he does, what type of training he gets, and just kind of demystify the process for us. Because so often we'll hear on the news or in some sort of, podcast, well, they got cell phone data and they got their guy. But how? There are so many steps in between. So kind of with that, Jay, can you give us a little bit of a background of how you ended up where you are today? Because I bet you a lot of listeners are going to want to follow your path as well.
So I've been in the Bureau since 2007 and initially stationed up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, a little bit colder than where I am now, but up there working on violent gangs, Safe Streets Task Force, working a lot of violent crime issues and things like that. But really my interest in cell phones and that kind of technology started before that. For 10 years prior to coming into Bureau, I was in active duty United States Army for 10 years. Spent 4 years as a tanker doing tanks and stuff like that, which was fun. And then my last 6 years, I worked military intelligence, specifically at the National Security Agency, where I kind of got introduced to a lot of cell phone, satellite communications, social media kind of stuff that was kind of up and coming at the time. But that's kind of what really piqued my interest in all of this and really made me start to love it. So then about 2015, an opportunity came up for me to join the CAST unit, Cellular Analysis Survey Team with the FBI. And so jumped on it. Obviously, I love this stuff. So that's kind of what got me started. and interested in doing cell phone analysis and digital information.
And what exactly is CAST? We hear that term a lot, and a lot of people don't even know what CAST is or what it does.
Yeah, so CAST, again, stands for Cellular Analysis Survey Team. It's a unit, specialized unit in the FBI, stood up in '09 by a bunch of really smart dudes who figured out we could use cell phone towers and sectors to find general locations of information. And they use this for a lot of things. At the time, it was mostly like fugitives and Amber Alerts and things like that we still do it for today. So CAST right now, again, in 2009, it started with a handful of really smart guys. Now we're about 90 certified individuals that cover all throughout the United States. They're in different field offices across the United States. And then we even have some that assist outside the country with some of our activities out there.
So I think when people hear FBI, federal, they think you investigate federal crimes. And we often get a lot of questions about, people are always very confused about when the FBI is involved in local cases and when they're not. Obviously, cell phone technology is used to investigate a lot of traditional state crimes, murder, kidnapping, those sorts of things. So when do you become involved in local investigations, and what role do you play when you do?
Yeah, we have a unique role in that, and that's, the FBI is in a unique situation, and we have the manpower, the funding, the ability to do specialized training in certain fields like DNA and other things, and included in that is CAST. So with that, we have a capability that maybe some departments don't have, and we're able to assist them with technical assistance in cell phone stuff. So we get involved in a lot of state cases. I'd say almost 70 to 80% of all of our trials are local trials. We do a lot of, Fed stuff too, but, a lot of homicide trials, a lot of violent crime issues, kidnappings, those kinds of cases. Anytime that you need to locate a device, we get involved, and we love those partnerships, and it's great. We love to be able to support unit, local, other federal, state, anyone we can, we're willing to help how we can.
Kind of along those lines, when you do get involved, what role does your unit play? And you said something. You said, if someone needs to find a device, we come in. That sounds again like magic to me. How do you use, all the tools and all the specialized training in order to do something like find the phone that I have in my hand right now?
Yeah. So first off, what do we do when we come into a case? It really depends on at what level we get in. So if it's CAST works just about every Amber Alert in every state. I work Amber Alerts in Alabama, Georgia, Panhandle of Florida. So anytime there's a missing kid or any of that kind of stuff, we get involved in that. And so if we're involved that early in a case, we can help the investigators, know what's available from company X. Say it's, cell phone records from T-Mobile, or, maybe it's Facebook message stuff, or maybe it's Discord information or something like that. We can help with our experience steer the investigation, or at least provide sources that they could go to get potential information for us to help analyze.
I mean, you kind of touched on something, which is, I think maybe back in the day when we thought about cell phones and identifying a cell phone, it was just that. It was a cell phone where you made outgoing and incoming calls. Obviously, today, there are now so many ways to use our phones to communicate. You listed some of them: Discord, Facebook Messenger, other social media avenues. So before we kind of enter the world of all these other ways of communicating with our phones and online, can you explain, like in layman's terms, because I really don't know the answer to this, how incoming and outgoing calls can be used in an investigation? And I know there are cell towers. I know there's something called cell site analysis, but I don't exactly know how those are used and what your role is in that. So can you explain that?
Yeah, of course. So if we talk about how calls are, used both incoming and outgoing, at first I think we need to talk about how does the phone even connect, right? And so its connection to the world, your phone as it sits there on the desk, its connection to the world is either cell phone towers or Wi-Fi. And a lot of the stuff that we look at is based on the cell phone tower connection. And that's the largest part of a connection between your device and the network. And so anytime you want to place or receive a call, send a text message, play your favorite game, listen to Spotify, listen to your podcast, all of those things require a connection. And so the phone, as it sits there, is always scanning the environment, the RF environment, looking for the strongest, clearest signal so that when you're ready to do all of those things or someone calls you, the device knows which tower and which sector or side of each of those towers has the strongest, clearest signal, and then it chooses that one to place or receive its call or data session or any of those other things. It kind of boils down to, again, the connection, and then all of those interactions with your phone, all of your calls, text messages, your data sessions, those have records kept by the service provider. So say you have a T-Mobile phone or a Verizon phone, they have to keep track of every interaction on their network, calls, texts, and data. And they do those in what's called call detail records, or CDRs for short. If you listen to, some of these trial stuff, they'll talk about, CDRs. That's kind of like your old school phone bill when we used to get like a paper bill, right? It would have our number, the other number we called, the date and time of that call, the duration, be it 60 seconds, 30 seconds, or whatever. But the providers also keep information on those records that they use and also could be useful to law enforcement. And that is the cell phone tower and the sector used for each of those calls, texts, or data sessions. And so that's the data that we can use, obtained, via a search warrant or through exigent means in an emergency, that we can use that data to then locate a general area, a tower, and a sector that a phone used at a specific time.
So let me ask you something about that. So there's a couple things I think people say when they question maybe just how much you can trust the record. One of them is sometimes towers are overloaded. Towers can only accept so many calls. I think that's one of the reasons they're divided into three sectors, is it actually makes it, they have 3 times as many calls as they can accept. And so if a tower's overloaded, then the cell phone is not going to connect to the strongest signal, but the next strongest signal or whatnot. Is that a problem when you're trying to then use calls to determine where someone is when they make them?
No, not really. And the reason is because think of cell phone towers, like when they put in towers, think of it as like a sprinkler system in our yard, right? Or in a business. If you're going to put in a sprinkler system to cover your yard to make sure that everywhere gets water, right? I live in the South, so you need a sprinkler system, otherwise your grass is going to die. But you want everywhere in your yard to get water. You don't want one sprinkler head to not be able, the sprinkler heads butt up to each other and there to be a gap in between your 2 sprinkler heads. So you shoot one sprinkler head a little bit into the other's area and create overlap with the sprinkler heads, because you want to make sure enough water gets everywhere in their yard and there's no dead spots. Well, that's exactly what they do in a cell phone network. They want to make sure that everywhere is covered and that there's some overlap in between towers and sectors, so that as you drive down the interstate, you don't lose your signal and then have to place the call again or do whatever as you move around. And so in an area, there could be 1 or 2 spots where only one tower provides coverage to an area. So if you've been at like a big concert or something like that, and you try and place a call, you might get that, like do, all circuits are busy, right? And that means that the tower that your phone selected to place a call is maybe overburdened, and that there's no other tower and sector that provides coverage to where you are. Now, if you are typically in a spot where that may happen, but there's another tower that provides coverage in that overlap area, then your phone will just go to that. So really, there's not an issue, because the phone has to be in the coverage area of the tower and the sector in order for your phone to use it. So if you place a call using AT&T Tower 123, you have to be in the footprint. And that's basically the bottom line of it, right? And then is defining that footprint of where that tower and sector provides coverage.
And in your experience, you've actually analyzed these records, and this is not some esoteric point, but you've looked at actual cell phone records and actual cell site analysis. How accurate, in your experience, has that been in either locating someone or having it stand up to cross-examination if you're in court testifying about these cell phone records?
Yeah, I mean, these are extremely reliable, and they are for a couple of reasons. First off, like, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry, right? We pay a lot of money for our phones and for the service in our phones, right? We pay a lot of money to use our phones. And so if we're not happy, say we're with AT&T, if we're not happy with AT&T, we just go to T-Mobile, or we just go to Verizon, or we find another service provider that'll be happy for us. So the main reason of these records, they're business records kept by T-Mobile, Verizon, AT&T, and they keep them in order to optimize their network. They want to know, hey, where are people placing calls from? Where are their dropped calls? Where do we need to maybe look at putting another tower in to provide coverage? You know, they use these records daily to optimize their network. So they're accurate because they need them to be accurate. The second reason is, if you think about when cell phones became popular, like the late 80s and early 90s, we bought our phones and our plans two main ways. One was you would buy like 300-minute plan, right? And they needed to accurately keep track of every minute that you use, so that way when you went to 301, they got their 25 cents a minute or whatever they were going to charge on top of that. So they accurately kept track of all of your calls and the duration of all of those calls. And then we also, at the same time, had what's called home network and roaming charges, right? So if you lived in, let's say, Chicago, and you went on vacation at that time down to Disney World, well, that was outside of your home network, and that would be considered roaming. So the providers accurately kept track of all the towers and sectors you used outside of your home network so that they could bill you extra for that. And even though we don't pay for our phones that way anymore, you know, we have unlimited plans, you can take your phone anywhere in the United States, like, they still keep track of all of those things because information is power, as we all know. So, and then the last thing is the federal government, the FCC, Federal Communication Commission, mandates that cellular providers have to be able to provide a cell phone tower and a sector for 911 callers. So that way, if you call and your battery runs out or you get disconnected, first responders know a tower and sector to look for you. And that's mandated by the government for them to provide. So, you know, they have to be reliable. And boy, let me tell you, we use them on a daily basis to provide, you know, missing and lost kids, to provide location of evidence, to provide location of video for surveillance purposes, things like that. So, I mean, we've validated the information just by the use of it throughout the years we've been doing this.
So let me ask you this. So obviously you can make phone calls and you can receive phone calls. Is there any difference in the way that you look at outgoing versus incoming calls? And is there any difference in your experience in the accuracy, the location accuracy of those calls?
So, I mean, the answer is no, really. But records today, we don't have that problem, and we haven't for years. When cell phone analysis started and phone companies were creating their call detail records, or CDRs, the records we use, sometimes what you would see is outgoing calls. We know the phone's on, it's using a tower, it's using a sector, it's providing that information. And so in the early, 90s, in an incoming call, if the device could not be located by the network, sometimes it would populate a location from what we call the Home Location Registry, or the HLR. And so let's say, for instance, you know, I live in the South. Let's say I fly to DC for a meeting. Well, I go to the airport. If we're looking at my records, we could see, I called my wife before I got on the plane to say, hey, I'm leaving or whatever, or she called me. We could see our incoming, outgoing calls, and they would be in Atlanta. And then as I fly to DC, I have to turn my phone off. As I fly to DC, if people call me, and again, this is when records started in the 80s and 90s, sometimes you would see they would reach out to the device. The device was off the network and no one knew where it was. So they would just populate information of what is in my home location registry of either Atlanta or somewhere in the South until I landed in DC and turned my phone back on. And then, incoming calls and outgoing calls, they know the tower and sector that's used because my phone used it and it was populated in the records. So we don't see that as an issue in records today, and we haven't for 10, 12, 15 years probably. But when records started, that was an issue. And I think that's sometimes why you see, in some of your old cases, hey guys, I'll be honest, I've listened to your podcast before. So I know that in some of your old cases, you guys have brought up cell phone records and the difference between incoming and outgoing.
So would that be a problem for an answered incoming call? Or is that just literally if your phone's off in your pocket?
Just if your phone is off in your pocket. If your phone is on and it's an answered call, then the network knows which tower and sector you use because it routed that incoming call to that tower and to that sector for your phone to use.
And would that be the case even if you don't pick up?
Yeah. So if your phone is on, and each provider keeps records differently, but if your phone is on and it can find your phone. So a lot of times what will happen is, say, again, the example of DC, I fly into DC and I use my phone. Well, the network knows my phone is in DC, but say, I'm picking up my bags and somebody calls. What happens is an incoming call will come to the switch or the group of towers that covers the DC area, and it'll page Jay's phone. Hey, Jay, you have an incoming call. Which tower should we send it to? If my phone doesn't pick it up, a lot of times it knows, hey, the last time we saw it was in DC, so we're just going to populate the DC switch. Now, if I see the call and it's, I'm getting into an Uber and I can't take it, but I just slide them to voicemail or send them to voicemail, that's an action by the phone that has sent them to voicemail. So a tower and sector has been assigned for that call, and those are considered accurate towers and sectors.
So obviously back in the day, I guess really all you had were incoming, outgoing calls. That's what cell phones did before the iPhone came along, right?
They were phones. What do you know?
They were phones. They got smaller and smaller. It's funny because it's like the cell phone got smaller and smaller and smaller, and then suddenly it started getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But now, well, one question real fast. Text messages. Can you do location based on text messages, or is that different in kind from your incoming and outgoing calls?
Yeah, regular text messages, yeah. I mean, they're using a tower and a sector just like a phone call would be. The one exception is iMessages. So an iMessage is considered a data session. And the cell phone provider, Verizon and AT&T, they don't know that an iMessage has gone across because it's using just data. So we'll see a data session, but we might see an open data session because you had, Facebook or Snapchat going on your phone or something. We can't tell whether an iMessage was sent or received.
Similarly, with the text messages, does Wi-Fi work the same way? Because we talked about how your phone can connect to cell phone towers and Wi-Fi. And we've talked all about the cell phone towers, and it makes sense that if it pings, there are these coverage areas. How does Wi-Fi fit into this analysis, and how does it change your ability to use your analysis to locate phones?
Yeah, so again, we still attack the problem the same way. We're looking for the connection, right? We're looking for that connection between the phone and whatever. How did it get to do whatever it wanted to do? And in cellular, obviously, then we're looking for the tower sector. But in Wi-Fi, we're looking, what did your phone use to access the internet, to send its call or text message if you're doing Wi-Fi calling? And So with that, if you're using Wi-Fi calling for Verizon and you're still using your same phone number and you just set it to Wi-Fi calling, the provider will be able to show that it was a Wi-Fi call, and then we can look at some data records and data sessions in there to see some IP addresses that you have used. If you're on Facebook or something like that, then obviously we, also need to get legal compliance to, Facebook or Snapchat to see what IP addresses your phone. IP addresses are basically the connection, the numbered connection between your phone and your access point. And then once we know that, then we can, we can send a subpoena to Starbucks to say, hey, who used this IP address at this specific date and time? Because we know you own that IP address, but what device used it at this specific date and time? Or we could go to Comcast if you're using your home Wi-Fi, things like that.
So we're about to get into the now, when it seems like cell phones are kind of like a little tracking device that we wear on our body that tell you everything about us. Before we get into that too much, we talked about cell phones, and in the old days, I guess you had the tower and the sector. And the sector, I don't know how big the sectors are. I don't know if that varies depending on the area it's trying to cover or whatnot. But generally speaking, if all you have is the tower and the sector, all you can say is that person is somewhere in that geographical area, right? If that's all you had.
Yeah, and really it depends. The geographical area depends on where you're at and how many towers are there, right? If we're talking downtown New York City, where there's lots of people, they need lots of towers. Towers are way closer together, right? We can say, hey, they're within these couple blocks, because if they were farther than that, they would have used another tower and another sector. But if you're in, rural parts of Mississippi or Louisiana where towers can provide coverage, towers are 10, 15 miles apart, that coverage area becomes wider. And so then it's harder to say specifically where a device is or isn't using call detail records. Again, we just have the tower and the sector or side of the tower that's used from the call detail record.
But I know now you guys have a lot more information from cell phone companies that help you pinpoint people. I think I've heard you talk about timing bands before, that sort of thing. I think that's something that people really don't know about.
Yeah, timing events, boy, we love it. It's like the gold standard for what we do now. So let me just explain why towers and sectors and stuff, right? It's all for capacity reasons, meaning Verizon wants to provide as many spots for users as they can. So they put a cell phone tower in, right? And that provides users spots, towers, and sector space for users. But then in order to get more capacity or more users, they take that one tower and they divide it up into sectors, typically 3 sectors, towers. And so now you divided it, by the tower and then by the sector, more capacity. But then to get even more users, what they do is they take each sector or the antennas on each sector and they divide up the timing on each of those. Meaning when my phone uses a tower, it doesn't solely have that antenna for my whole 2-minute conversation with my daughter, right? It divides that antenna up into time spots. And it says, hey, Jay's phone is going to talk for 5 milliseconds. And then Alice's phone has got 5 milliseconds. And then Brett's phone's after that. And then Jay's phone comes back after that. So it times all of these up. Well, in order for all the phones to reach the towers at the same time, they have to sync them all. And that's what timing advance is. So timing advance, it happens on a phone all the time, no matter if you are placing a call, receiving a call, doing data or anything. It's the phone syncing with the network. And what happens is the tower sends a message to the phone, and then that message is sent back to the tower. And they measure the time that it takes for that message to go to the phone and back. And then they multiply it times a set speed, which is the speed of light. And that determines how far away that phone is when it had a check-in with the network, syncing with the network. And so that way it knows, hey, Jay's phone's 1 mile away from the tower. In order to reach its spot, these 5 milliseconds that it has, it needs to send its signal at this specific spot. While Alice's phone is, a tenth of a mile away, and it can wait a little bit longer because it's so close. Well, what we get in the timing advance is some companies keep those records, again, because they're optimizing their network. Where are people placing calls from? Where do we see good interactions and bad interactions within our network? And so they'll keep these timing advance records. And again, the timing advance records has the tower, the sector or side of the tower, plus the distance that the phone is from the tower when it had that specific interaction. And the beauty for law enforcement for us is it's not reliant upon a call, a text message, or a data session made by the user, because the phone is always doing this, figuring out, hey, when Jay wants to pick his phone up to call his wife, I need to know exactly where I am and when I need to send my signal. So we love timing events. It's the gold standard currently for historical call detail analysis.
My mind is blown. Oh my goodness, that is incredible information. How long has that been around? I mean, it sounds like it's kind of newly developed and you guys are using it, but how far does this go back? When was it, implemented? When did cell phone companies start doing this time banding?
So it's been there for years and years, because it's part of the technology to sync the phones up. We started CAST. Again, one of the really nice things of CAST is, as the FBI, we develop good liaisons with companies and other things. So we meet with providers. It's part of our CAST training. So we meet with providers every year to see what's the latest and greatest technology. What do you guys see as, when is 3G going away? When's 5G voice going to be everywhere? Does that affect what cell phone records are going to look like? Does that affect, where you guys are going to put towers? Like, we meet because we want the latest and greatest information so that we can accurately discuss these things in criminal trials, plus accurately use this information when we have that missing kid and we need it to find it, right? So I don't know specifically when CAST started using it. I got into the program in 2016, 15. I was training in the program. We were using it from some providers at that point in time. We now have it from all of the providers. And again, that's a partnership between us and businesses saying, hey, like, we know you have this information and this is how it can be helpful to the greater good, finding kids, putting bad guys in jail or proving people innocent, right? We use that for cell phone records all the time too. So it's been around. We use it every day. The problem with it is it's voluminous. There's tons of data, right? And so because of that, cell phone companies don't keep the data for a really long time. And so if we being law enforcement in general, doesn't identify the phone number that we need to get those records from to a certain point, those records could be gone. Because again, they only keep them. Some companies keep them as short as a week. Some companies keep them a little bit longer.
And this partnership that you're talking about with private companies, obviously with this voluminous data, and I assume there are requests all the time for this information from these private companies that are not government run. I've always been curious about the interaction between these private companies and the federal government, especially because you said these records are their business records, right? Like, it is added cost, added time for them to keep records for law enforcement purposes. But, how does that interaction work? And what is your experience in working with these private companies who are turning over their business records for a public service?
Right. These are business records. They keep these records for the betterment of their business, be it, Facebook, be it T-Mobile, Verizon, AT&T, all of those. As a user of this data, I'm not always on the forefront of getting the data and that kind of stuff. But we do obviously work with the companies, and we understand that there's a need for privacy protection, right? And we do obtain this information through search warrants, through legal search warrants signed by a judge. And, except for, obviously in an exigent issue, you have a missing kid. A lot of these companies are, very good with working with us within exigent issues, but they also have privacy concerns, and we completely understand those. I for one, as American, don't want all my data everywhere, right? And so I completely agree with businesses needing and requesting search warrants and other types of things for the data. And again, it just goes to show, a lot of these businesses, yeah, they're there to make money, but a lot of times they're helpful to our community at the same time, but by saying, hey, we have this kind of information, and if you get legal compliance for this information, we'd be willing to share it in order to, better your case or help you find the missing kid or to do whatever. So again, we really appreciate our partnership with them and understand that, they have customers and needs and restrictions, and we're willing to work within those things.
So you mentioned privacy, and I think GPS is something that people hear about GPS and that's where they kind of get concerned about privacy. I think it's interesting though. Sounds like if I have one of those old throwback flip phones, based on what you were saying about the timing advance and everything else, I mean, if you have that data, you can pretty much see exactly where I am at any particular time. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah. And again, we're reliant upon how often the phone company keeps those timing advance things, right? And so if your phone is moving a lot, there could be a lot of check-ins with the network, and we could see where your device was, again, every couple minutes, or maybe even sometimes a couple times a minute. But if your device isn't checking in with the network, either because it's stationary and it doesn't need to, or whether your device is off, it really depends. So we can't say that we know where a device is all the time, but we do know where it is when it has recorded interactions on the network, which is what we use.
Well, how does GPS help you to sort of bolster that information and be even better at figuring out where exactly a phone is at any particular time?
Yeah, so GPS is obviously a little different, a different technology. So we're not using the towers and sectors. We're using the GPS, or global positioning system, antennas that are within the cell phone itself. And so with that, we get information through GPS, mostly through external companies through the device, meaning Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile. They typically can't provide us GPS location of where a device is. Back a long time ago, when we used to do GPS in the early 2000s and 2010s, networks, the providers had more access to the phone, meaning T-Mobile could tell your phone, hey, turn on your GPS and provide me your location. But because of privacy concerns and all of those other things, the providers no longer have access to do that on your phone. What we get instead is GPS information from other providers, say Google. If you have your location-based services turned on social media platforms like Snapchat, or other things like that collect GPS information from your device. And obviously this is stuff that we would layer within our analysis with our call detail records, right? If I can get GPS information from Life 360 and put it with my call detail records and put it with my timing advance, and then we'll talk maybe more about telematics. I love telematics, vehicle telematics, but maybe you can get location information from your vehicle, and we can put all of those things together to create a more detailed and thorough analysis of where a device or several devices are.
You're talking about, information from lots of different sources, whether it be Snapchat, Google, cell phone companies, Wi-Fi, all of this information. We know it's voluminous. And we also know that you work in exigent circumstances, like that example of a kidnapped child where every minute counts. How quickly can you get this information? How do you sift through this voluminous information? And kind of what's the interaction on a particular day when you do have an emergency situation and, speed is of the essence? How quickly can you get this information and how quickly can you then turn that around into the analysis that produces the information that you ultimately need?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, exigent speed is always a thing that we try and do at, as quickly as we can get and analyze information, the better. And a lot of that goes back to our partnerships with an agency. So a couple months ago, I had a exigent issue come up where a male teenager, was missing. And he texted his mother and said, "Hey, I can't take it anymore. I have pills and I'm going to end my life." And that's it. And so we had an excellent partnership with the law enforcement agency in that area, the police department. And we had done some exigence with them previously. We had done some training. And so, they called me right away and say, "Hey, can you help?" Of course, I can help with this. So we kind of broke it up because, again, with our local partners, we want to be a team, right? And so I'm like, "Hey, if you guys call the service provider and get the records, I'll look into his social media stuff using exigent, and we can, send me all the stuff and we can kind of put it all together." So in that instance, we had a good outcome. We were able to use his timing advance records and some social media stuff in order to pinpoint a good location for the device. And law enforcement went out there and recovered him prior to him committing suicide, which was a good outcome. But again, it's all about, our partnerships and developing good partnerships and then trusting within the law enforcement community that, we're all on the same team, we're all working together to the same end. And then which sources of information do we go to? That just happened to be a device and using a provider that we knew had excellent timing advance records. And so we were able to use that. The law enforcement provided me with some social media stuff. We knew that Snapchat is really helpful with law enforcement under exigent circumstances of a child. And so we were able to get good records for that. And so I think it's just experience and knowledge of like, hey, in a time crunch, where do I need to go to get the most bang for my buck first? And again, that's just experience and just being able to be in an organization that provides the training and the experience to do that.
So I want you to talk about vehicles before we let you go. But before we do that, we hear so much about the big cases, the murder trials and all other stuff, but you just told a story that's very different, very under the radar. Don't know if that story made any press at all, but it has to be something that I think is very, very fulfilling for you and the other people in the unit. How often do you see things like that where, just in your day-to-day business, you're helping save a child from something like suicide?
It's the best job I've ever had. I love it. Although, like every job, there's good days and there's bad days. And the good days are awesome. And then some of the bad days, you just have to find the good in the bad day. So how often do we do it? Unfortunately, we do it too much, right? In our society, we wish we did it less, but that's what our job is. CAST is finding people. We probably recover at least 2 or 3 missing kids every week. I've been a part of, I don't know, probably 40 or 50 exigent child cases. And again, it can be very fulfilling. Again, like I got 2 kids, if they went missing, I would want every avenue to find them. And so that's what I love about our CAST unit. There's 80 of us, but we get together once a year and I know every one of them. Because if I got a case here in the South and then all of a sudden my missing kid is up in Washington State, I know that there's dudes up there that I can call that will drop everything and help me with that case. And so, hey, I'm kind of biased. I love the Bureau, but CAST is the best unit in the Bureau. So I get to do stuff that I joined the Bureau to do almost every single day. I don't think you can beat that.
Yeah. And thank you for your service on that, because what you're describing, a lot of people look at the FBI, maybe even think about cell phone analysis and think it's only for criminal conduct. But this is an incredible service that you're doing for our community that is unseen. The most of what you do is unseen. Of course, there's the flashy, criminal investigations, but it's the day to day, a parent missing their child that, makes everyone's heart drop to the bottom of their stomach. And you get to do that with only 80 other people. That's the other thing. We talk about resources a lot when we talk about these investigations because a lot of people want to jump to the police didn't work fast enough or law enforcement didn't care enough to look down all these 1 million different leads. And the reality is resources are limited. And even as well funded as CAST may be, it's still just talking about 80 people who don't cover the South, but cover the entire country. And the things that you guys are able to do and help all these jurisdictions with such limited resources is incredible. I mean, it's truly incredible what you guys do. And I hope a lot of what you do, you don't get to hear thank yous every day. And most of the time, I think you show up to situations and you might even be yelled at as the bad guy, or in court, you get yelled at by attorneys or judges. But I mean, thank you for being a real day hero. And I really mean that. Talking to you and hearing about all of this, it's so clear that you are motivated by doing, a public good throughout all this. So it gives me incredible confidence in our law enforcement.
And your reward for that is you get to talk about vehicles, which I know you love before we sign off. So before we let you go, tell us a little bit about what I guess is maybe a developing area of this with vehicles just getting smarter and smarter. How can you use those in your investigations?
Yeah, so vehicle telematics. So if you think about, like, I have like a 2019 Dodge Durango as a personal car, right? Not brand new, but not super old. But in it, they have made it capable so that I can create my car into like a Wi-Fi hotspot, right? So that way, when we go on family vacations, my kids can play video games in the back or watch movies or whatever. But how they've done that is they've put cell phones, or basically cell phones, in the vehicles to be communication devices between your vehicle and the network. And they do it, of course, so you can have Wi-Fi, but they also do it because they collect information about your vehicle, how often you drive it, how hot does it get, when does it need an oil change, and it sends that information back to the manufacturer, be it Nissan or Ford or whatever. And that way, when you've driven, I don't know, 3,000 miles, you might get an email that says, oh, hey, your car is due for an oil change. You're like, wow, they just knew it. Well, they didn't really just know it, because information is power. And so because cell phones are now embedded in vehicles, we can treat that vehicle just like we do a cell phone. So we can get historical records for it. We can get timing advance for it. We can ping it, which is to ask the phone company for, a potential lat long of where a device is. So we can use that again in our investigations to see, hey, where does a vehicle go? Where has it been? And all of those things. And we do it, a lot of what we use that for, obviously, is a lot of exigent issues, kidnappings, murder fugitives, any of those other kinds of things. We can see that kind of stuff. So it is a fastly growing side of what we do. I think the latest thing that I saw that came out was saying by 2024, new cars sold, about 90% will have a cell phone in them. And so not only can we use that data like we do, use the cell phone towers and all those other things, we can also extract data from it. Meaning, just like when you have a cell phone and you hook it up to a device with a search warrant, you can extract the data that's on the device. Because remember, these phones, just like Brett said, they're not phones anymore. I mean, percentage of phone calls is probably like 15% of what you use the device for. They're storage devices, they're whatever else. So you can extract these devices or download them. Well, you can do that to a vehicle as well. So you can see, hey, what phone's connected to the Wi-Fi in the car, Bluetooth in the car. There's tons of data in there. We used the case to find, unfortunately, we had a missing lady, identified a subject in a vehicle. The guy left his phone at home when he disposed of a body, but he drove a car, and this car was a connected vehicle, is what we call it, when it has a phone in it. And we were able to see some location history, but also we were able to see, hey, the trunk opened for 30 seconds at this date and time. And we're like, hey, where was the phone at this date and time? Or where was the car based on the phone in the car at this specific date and time, and provide a search area to go look for a body. So again, there's tons of data out there. We just have to figure out what's the best in our circumstance to use for it.
I remember back in the day when the insurance company was trying to catch you driving too fast and you had to attach like a little thing to your steering wheel. And for the 30 days or whatever that your insurance company made you put it on, you would drive like a perfect citizen. You never went over the speed limit. A speed bump came and you slowed to a crawl and barely went over it. Every stop sign was a full stop. And the second that device came off, it was like, pedal to the metal. And what you're telling me is that there's a lot more information about the way I drive and how I drive that I don't think I previously understood. and
Oh
and
yeah.
that's just fascinating.
Yeah, so we have a Volkswagen as another car, and it has an app. And we also had a young driver at the time, so we could log into the app and see, hey, what was her average speed and all these other things. It's just data collected by Ford, by Nissan, by Toyota, and they use that information for their purposes or sell it to insurance companies and to all over. So yeah, that's what I love my job. There's always going to be data to look at for sure.
I'll ask you one last question, and then I'll be all done. So forensics, obviously we use it in a lot of cases. A lot of times forensics comes under attack because defense attorneys have to defend their clients, and one way to do that is to undermine the evidence. And sometimes you see entire forensic disciplines kind of fall away. Think about like forensic dental bite mark analysis, that kind of stuff. I mean, that kind of falls away and comes under attack. How confident are you that what we're talking about today is accurate, is something that should be used in trials, and will continue to be used going forward?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I wouldn't be doing this job if I didn't think that it was accurate, and we prove it's accurate. CAST proves it's accurate on a daily basis by, again, finding the missing kid, by finding a search area for video, and then seeing the person or the device on video. Again, we prove its validity just by the uses and the results of our analysis on a daily basis. I think with what we're learning about 5G and the signal strength and the throughput and how fast you'll be able to download stuff with 5G, towers are going to have to be closer together. And with towers being closer together, that makes our data more precise. It's always accurate, but how precise can we be really depends. And I think with 5G coming, with Wi-Fi calling, using Wi-Fi hotspots, like we could, be more precise in things with that. And I think this is going to be a technology that, I mean, obviously it changes. If we look back, I remember my mom having a first cell phone, and it was in a bag, right? And it had to be plugged into the car. And now, you have air tags and you have all these other really small devices that we can do all these things. So technology is going to continue to change. And I think it's on us as the CAST unit to stay up to date with that and develop partnerships with these new emerging technologies in order to provide a good service to the community, on that. Maybe if you ever want to do this again, that we didn't really talk about is Google and geofence.
Geofence.
Stuff.
Oh yeah.
I
Yeah.
thought
So
about
that's
asking you that. I think there can be an entire episode on geofence warrants because people don't understand geofence and they think it's like this, what you were saying, flying birds. You can put out a net and then just like, scoop up all the bad guys. And that's not how it works. I thought about asking you that, but I was like, that could be its own episode.
we could talk. That would add another half an hour to talk about Google and how they collect information. And then that's a decent source to us. It's actually going down each year, which is surprising. I think is based on some retention limitations that Google is putting. They're still collecting all the data, but what they're doing, and iPhone, they don't get information mostly from, an iPhone percentage is actually going up. More people are buying iPhones than Androids.
Really quick on the Google information, how does it work when like iPhones also have Google apps on them? Is there even bigger overlap there so they're not just dependent on Android phones to gather the data?
Yeah, so the Apple phone limits Google. So Google's always requesting information. So on your Android-based phone, they own Android. So they tell the operating system, hey, collect the barometric pressure, this, and then they send all that stuff back every couple minutes, right? And they know everything. But on the Apple, the iOS operating system, they're a bigger privacy company. So they limit what the device will send to Google. The only time we tend to see stuff is when there's a Google-based app running on an iPhone. So if you're running Google Maps, we'll get some GPS location information or whatever. But most of the other times we don't see it because that Apple operating system doesn't allow the device to send that information to Google. It limits it.
Oh, fascinating.
But on
And
your Android device, it's doing it all the time.
because it owns it and it's collecting information. So really quick, because I just want to know if you could give us 2 more minutes. Can you explain quickly what geofence warrants are? Because there's such a misperception as to what it is. I will say a lot of people do think it's exactly that. You have a net, the federal government, the FBI gets to put out their hands and just grab all the phones that were in this area. And how could they not know who the murderer is if they're holding in their hands every single person that was in that geolocation? But how does geofence warrants work?
Yeah, Google geofence warrants. So the way they kind of work is, so we all know Google is always downloading your location information from your Android-based device, and it's sending that information as it knows it from Wi-Fi locations and from GPS and from other things like that. So the geofence is basically us going to Google with a warrant that says within a certain area. So here's the lat and long of the crime scene. Within 100 meters, I want every Google device that had a location history within that period of time. So we have to be very restrictive. One, because we should be restrictive, right? We shouldn't say, I want everything for the last 2 days, even though the homicide happened in 5 minutes, right? Because that's just over collection of what we have. But also, we need to be restrictive because if you ask for too much and it's a busy place or there's a road that goes in between your area, you could have 1,000 devices. Now, how do I determine what needle in all the stacks of needles that I'm looking for? There's an art to geofences in looking at, hey, when did the device move into my geofence box? When did it move out? Does that correspond? We tend to do geofences to compare. So if I have a geofence on the homicides on a Tuesday, I might look the Tuesday before at the exact same time and say, hey, what devices were there that Tuesday, but not this Tuesday? I can throw the devices that were at both Tuesdays out because they're probably folks that live in the area as opposed to a home invasion and they killed somebody, right? So it's an art to it. But yeah, it's a big deal now because a lot of courts are being restrictive, as they should, but shouldn't be throwing the technique out. The data's there. Why can't we use it if we are just good stewards of it? And the geofence warrant has actually changed a bunch since it came out. We used to get all the data we wanted after one step of the warrant, but now there's multiple steps. And so Google will provide you all the devices that are there, but they make up identifiers for it. And so you can't get anything from it because they're all made up devices. Then you have to go back to Google and say, hey, give me additional information about this made up device tag that you got. And they'll give you like an extra 30 minutes on either side of your geofence to see, hey, was the guy just driving through, or did he stay there and then leave right around the time your witnesses say someone ran away? Like, we just have to be restrictive of it.
Yet those extra steps were added because of the privacy concerns. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. So now we actually do a 3-step warrant, and you have to get, it's recommended that you get a warrant in between each step. So it's 3 warrants for one source of information.
And I know we've talked about the privacy concerns, but obviously when you're adding these 3-step warrants, that's more time in between. It's more time to write those affidavits, to go before a judge, to have a judge sign it or deny it, and then to get the information from the actual provider, which obviously in exigent circumstances that wouldn't work. And so it's always helpful to know that when we're talking about privacy concerns, which are very real and constitutionally protected, when you put in fixes, there are costs on the other side, and it's a constant, balancing test.
Yeah, and another thing, like, we didn't really get into much is tower dumps too, right? And so it's great if you know a subject's phone number and you can get records for it, but what if you don't? So that's another technique that we use, and especially now that we can do timing advanced tower dumps, we can be very specific about an area because we know the distance that the crime was from the tower. We can determine that. Then we know, hey, we're only looking at phones that are a half mile away, as opposed to phones that could be anywhere from a 1/10 of a mile to 2 miles away if it's in a rural area. Just another technique. So again, this is my jam. I love this stuff. If you guys ever want to do something else, I'd love to do it again sometime. It was fun. Thank you for allowing me to do that.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I kept you longer. I was just so curious. Thank you again,
That's
Jay.
fascinating.
What a great note to end on. Although, honestly, Jay, I could speak to you for hours, and I know that our listeners are going to feel the same way, but we want to be respectful of your time because I am becoming ever increasingly aware that every minute you're on our podcast right now, you're not going to find a kid that may need your help. So I think as a public service, we need to let you go. But before we sign off, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I mean, I appreciate what you guys do as well. You know, the service that you guys talk about in these cases. Yeah, I mean, they're fun, and they're fun to listen to, and they get us thinking about all of these things. But you guys reaching out to different folks, including me, in order to educate the public so that it's not all, it doesn't appear like smoke and mirrors, and it doesn't appear that the FBI has flying birds flying around listening and watching you, right? Like, those things don't exist. Like, this is what we do on a daily basis when we need to locate a device. And it's not every device. We don't care where most 99.9999% of the people are, right? But in some circumstances, we have to know where people are because of the missing kid, the fugitive, the whatever else. But again, I appreciate you guys reaching out to us, giving us the opportunity to talk about this. Again, this is my jam. I love it. I could talk all day, but I do appreciate you guys making this available to me and to FBI CAST in general. So thanks for what you guys do too.
Well, thank you so much. And Special Agent Jay Berni with the FBI CAST. This is absolutely one of my favorite episodes, and I'm so glad that you are here. If you ever want to come back and talk to us, I know that our listeners are going to be clamoring to whatever episode that is. And obviously, we've stayed away from cases today because you are actively working on cases all day long. And I know this is a job where you don't get to sleep because, you know, your services don't really fall within the 9 to 5. So thank you again for all you do. And until next time, I'm Alice.
And I'm Brett.
And this is the Prosecutor's Legal Briefs.
Did nobody
Anyways,
take
we're getting
legal writing
sidetracked,
in
Brett.
school?
Brett,
Come
we're
on.
getting sidetracked.
Well,
I
I'm
know
still
you've
doing-
probably
I'm
had
still playing things. I'm still
a
playing
couple,
things.
you're in a couple deep, but like it is 9 o'clock. These people
know,
came
you
for
always say
Halloween. I thought of all people you would want to get on with Halloween.
I'm breaking it up. We're supposed to be talking when we're breaking it up.
I know. Then you're the one talking.
Well, I can talk and type your name at the same time.
Are
I have
you?
those abilities.
Can you? Someone's feisty tonight. Why, you just want to be combative today?
Yeah, I guess so. I'm gonna have a press
You
conference
guys.
tomorrow.